I'm Luis Scott, managing partner of Bader Scott Injury Lawyers, one of the fastest growing law firms in the country, and I'm also the co-founder of 8-Figure Firm Consulting. I've successfully built multiple companies by focusing on leadership, operations, and culture. Using these principles, my companies have generated close to $100 million in revenue. But before any of this success, I started my legal career as a receptionist, and I worked my way up to becoming managing partner. In each episode of this podcast, I sit down with leaders and entrepreneurs who have had the guts to step out on their own and the courage to face adversity. They share with us their tips for achievement, the challenges they have faced, and the glory of success. I welcome you to the Guts and Glory Show.
Chad Franson here, one of the hosts of the Guts and Glory Show. We feature top leaders who share challenges of leadership, the guts it takes to succeed, and the glory of success. This episode is brought to you by 8-Figure Firm Consulting. At 8-Figure Firm, they help law firms to grow to 8 figures. Luis Scott was telling me when he started his career, he was working over 80 hours a week trying to make partner. After that, he finally started his own firm and wished he had someone walking through the steps to growth. At 8-Figure Firm, they show you how to develop a business that works for you instead of working for it. Go to www.8figurefirm.com to learn more. Today we have David Benn, a founder and managing partner at workinjuryrights.com, a law firm that's dedicated to protecting the rights of Florida's injured workers. David has successfully represented hundreds of injured workers at the state of Florida and has obtained favorable recoveries on their behalf, both prior to and through trial judgments. David, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So tell me a little bit more about workinjuryrights.com and the kinds of clients you serve.
Yeah, so we opened this practice about 7, almost 8 years ago, and we exclusively represent injured workers in the state of Florida in workers' compensation cases. Workinjuryrights.com is the name that we adopted about a year or so ago. That's our domain name, our current domain name. And one of the motivating factors in adopting that name was we wanted to make sure that when we marketed to direct to consumer, right? When we're marketing to potential clients, I feel like so many law firms out there were so big and branded. You already knew the name. And for us, we weren't that branded. So we wanted to make sure that we had a name that spoke to our potential client and let them know, look, this is what we do. Work injuries is what we specialize in. It's the only type of case that we handle. And we've been proudly serving our local community for 7 years, and now we're starting to take more work statewide.
So what kind of situation would someone be in where they would want to call you?
The most common example, and we get all sorts of leads on a daily basis, but the most common example is, I hurt myself at work. It could have been a month ago, 2 months ago, and I'm having some type of problem. Either the insurance company is not paying me, they're not paying me correctly, my checks will come here and there, or usually it's an issue on the medical side where I'm seeing a doctor, this doctor's saying that my condition is pre-existing, even though I've never had a problem with my back or a problem with my knee in the past. What can you do to help me?
What makes you kind of particularly qualified to handle these types of cases?
Well, specifically with respect to myself, I've only practiced workers' compensation law in the state of Florida for 15 years. I've represented injured workers. I spent about 4.5 years representing insurance carriers. So we kind of have an idea of how they're going to approach the defense of the claim before they even hire an attorney. Everybody in this office has a specific skill set with respect to workers' compensation law. One of our partners, who happens to be my wife, Stacey Isaac, spent almost 2 decades on the insurance defense side, so she knows that side of the aisle really well. My other partner, William Harrow, has exclusively been practicing workers' compensation law since he became an attorney. And our associates now, that because we have so much work, we had to bring in associates, they all have significant workers' compensation law experience. So this isn't something that we dabble in or is just another practice group. This is our only practice group. So this is our entire focus.
What kind of benefit for you is it to kind of have worked on the other side? You kind of know what the other side is thinking.
So it's been some time since I've been an insurance defense lawyer. but their approach generally is the same. The insurance company, or whether it's their attorney or before they're represented, their whole mindset, and this is one of the problems in the Florida workers' comp system, is their whole mindset is, how do I limit my exposure? How do I take this claim where an individual is hurt and make it cost my insurance company, my boss, less money? And it's a really short-sighted viewpoint, because if they invested the resources properly and got the injured worker the correct medical care, the best medical care, you will have these people go to attorneys down the road because they're dissatisfied. So I apologize, I forgot what the question was at this point.
So what kind of benefit would it be for you to already kind of have worked on the opposite side, so you kind of know what they're thinking?
So we already know what they're going to do. That is their goal. And the way they get there is they'll conference with the medical providers. They'll try to catch your client in making misrepresentations about their medical history, even though they don't do it intentionally. So they have little tricks. They surveil the client. So they'll survey. If you get hurt and your case is significant enough, they will surveil you. They will have somebody in a white van follow you to the doctor, follow to your house, in the hopes that they catch you doing things that people normally do, right? Take out garbage, go to the grocery store, in an effort to portray you as somebody who is malingering or faking their symptoms. So they kind of have their tricks. And, we caution our clients from the very beginning, like, these are the things you have to look out for.
How did you start your journey as a legal professional?
So I graduated law school in 2005. I graduated from Rutgers University in New Jersey. I shortly thereafter moved down here and took the bar. And it just so happened that the first job opportunity I had was in this practice, workers' compensation law. That's back in 2006, and I've been here ever since.
What were the early days of your career like?
I think starting off in the legal profession, depending where you work, can be very challenging. When you're a young associate, you're essentially getting paid. Number one, you're getting paid to learn. But you're used to that practice typically is that you are a licensed attorney and they can send you places that they don't want to go. So in the early days, back in 2006, I was pretty much driving all over South Florida, attending litigation events in Miami, in Fort Lauderdale, in West Palm Beach, sometimes on the West Coast. And it was just a lot of get up and go.
How did workinjuryrights.com, or what it was originally known as, kind of come about? We'll talk about kind of the guts that it took to establish the firm on your own a little bit later, but just in general, how did it come about?
Yeah, so my wife, Stacy, is the founding partner of what eventually is now workinjuryrights.com. And the way it came about is she was a staff attorney at AIG. And AIG, shortly after we got married, this is around 2013, had a huge downsize. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, she was laid off as part of a big slash of their staff council. So at the time for her, and we were married all of like 6 months when this happened, it's like, what do we do? Because I knew that for her to transition from a staff counsel job, which I don't want to say it's easy, but it's relatively easier compared to working for private firms that are trying to bill by the hour. I just didn't see that my wife transitioning into a role at a private insurance defense firm that would be suitable for her. We had little kids, and that's a job that would have required a lot of time investment, a lot of travel, and it's not something that we thought was realistic. So we made the joint decision that, look, why don't you hang up a shingle? Let's see if we can market you in some kind of way and see if we can eventually, get cases coming in. And back then, this is, I think, 2014, you were able to request from the state of Florida a list every month of every single person in the state of Florida that reported getting hurt at work. You can no longer do that since 2016 or 17, but back then you could. And we developed a flyer. It had her picture on it, and she would mail that flyer out, or we'd have a company mail that flyer out to all these prospective clients. And really, pretty quickly, she started getting cases. And what happened was I was working at the time for another law firm that also represented injured workers. And I was very frank and told my boss, and I said, listen, this is what's going on. My wife is now going to represent injured workers also. And he got very scared off by that. He was not happy that there was, this new competitor in the industry, and one of his employees was married to them. So he basically was like, look, you got to decide if she's got to shut that down or you have to leave. And I said, okay, I'm leaving. So that was kind of the genesis of the formation of this law firm. And then William, who was our third partner, jumped on shortly thereafter. I want to say maybe 2 or 3 weeks later. And pretty much since July of 2014, we've just continued to grow.
What is one of your favorite success stories from the time that you guys started the firm until now?
There's so many to think about. I used to handle a much larger case, but me personally, one of the great successes I've had is I represented an individual who was shot at the workplace, and this individual happened to have a pretty significant criminal history. On paper, it didn't look good, and the insurance company denied the claim for a multitude of reasons. They accused this individual of insurance fraud because he lied under oath at a deposition about being in a gang. They denied that this workplace shooting was, I don't want to get too technical here, but they denied that it was connected to the workplace. They thought it was like a personal thing that just followed my client to the workplace. But we litigated that case twice. We had 2 what we call workers' comp final hearings before a judge. We prevailed in both of them. And it was a very, very challenging case because we spent a lot of time and resources on that case without any promise of getting paid. There was a chance that after about 1.5 years of litigation, we would get nothing and we would be out all that time. And I think we spent a significant amount of money on the discovery. We had to hire experts in workplace violence. We had to hire medical experts. We even considered having our client undergo polygraph testing, which wouldn't have been admissible in the underlying hearing. But we did prevail against an attorney who had been practicing. The defense attorney on the other side was an excellent attorney. He had been an attorney, I want to say, for longer than I've been a human being. He was practicing before I was born. And we were very fortunate to win those hearings, and our client came out well as a result, and we came out very well. So that's really probably the most memorable success story I have of.
Sure, that's a great story. What made you so kind of willing to take the case, or confident that that was one that you could handle?
When we took the case, it was not clear from the beginning that all these issues would arise and these potential defenses would be out there. So we didn't know at the time we took the case. That being said, as the case developed, I just had the mindset that I believed in my client. I believed that despite his, prior past, that none of this had anything to do with him. We actually spent a lot of time investigating it with law enforcement and speaking to law enforcement and trying to figure out what was going on. So it was just an innate belief in my client that he was being honest. And it also happened that, I just believed in myself. I believed that I was right about the law. I was right about how the facts applied to the law. And I just was all in. And I think, there's a lot of firms that at some point during that litigation, it could have been after 4 months, it could have been after 8 months, would have said, look, we're just going to settle and cut our losses because we have no guarantee of making any money on this case. And I just basically put all the chips on the table and said, we're going to do it. And I'll never forget the day we got that order. I think my office manager was crying because she knew how hard it was to get to that point and all the blood, sweat, and tears we put into it. So it was a really nice moment. But unfortunately, in my practice, it is so busy that you have that nice moment and then like you got to forget it the next day because you have 100 other people that need your help in some capacity. So unfortunately, we don't get to enjoy our wins to the extent I'm sure we'd like to, but that's okay because the client will remember. The client will always remember what you did for them, and that's really what keeps us going.
I'd love to talk about some of the lessons you've learned in your practice journey. How did you discover Eight Figure Firm and Louis Scott?
So yeah, that's an interesting story. My wife's sorority sister relocated from say Westchester, New York, to the town that we live in South Florida, and her husband is one of the executives at Ring Boost, which sells vanity phone numbers to all types of businesses, but a lot of phone numbers get sold in the legal industry. And we went out to dinner one night. I was explaining to him where I was in my practice. And, I had, at that point, I was kind of frustrated because we'd achieved growth, but it was very incremental. And it didn't allow me to put myself in the position I wanted to be as a manager of a business. And he had mentioned, well, I know these guys in Atlanta that have a very big practice. I think half of their practice is workers' comp, and I really think you should talk to them. So he connected me with Louis Scott. I called Louis on his cell one day. We had like a 1-hour conversation. He was really speaking my language. And I said, what's the next step? And I spoke to my partners and they all agreed like, yeah, let's hire him as a consultant. And probably one of the best decisions I've made in recent memory.
What are some lessons or a primary lesson that maybe you learned from Louis?
There's really so many, and every month that we get on our phone call and we talk, I feel like I'm always learning. I think that's part of that is that Luis is probably really committed to learning as well. And I feel like he always has very valuable insight. He really was pivotal in changing the trajectory of where we were going to where we're now headed. Last year, I'm not even sure we worked with Luis for a full 6 months last year. I want to say maybe we started in May, maybe June. I'm not quite sure. But last year, we increased our intakes by over 50%. We increased our top line revenue by over 20%. And those were growth numbers that we had never previously achieved. And now we're in a position where myself and my two other partners, now we can really hire other people to do the legal work and focus on the company. And before we had to do this very difficult dance of working in the company and working on the company. And you're kind of like always juggling between, I got to be the lawyer, I got to handle cases, and I have to like figure out how we're going to do marketing and budgeting and developing our client journey. So there's so much that he's taught us. It's hard to narrow it down to any one specific thing. But I think, the starting point is developing what are the core values of your company. And that's something that we didn't spend a lot of time really thinking about. How can we make sure that all of our marketing reflects those core values? And the second, probably most important thing is enhancing or developing our customer or client journey. I think as lawyers, and especially if you think you're a good lawyer, you think like your clients should just be happy because they have you as their lawyer and you're good. You're a good attorney. People in the community recognize you as a good attorney. You might get awards. But the reality is that the client doesn't know that. And it doesn't matter what your reputation is. If the client experiences you and doesn't get the best experience, whether it's the person that answers your phones or the person that schedules their events or the person that takes their phone call for some random request, it doesn't matter how good of a lawyer you are. So I think one of the most important things is how to refine our customer journey. And it's something we're still working on to this day. It's very difficult in any business, it could be a restaurant, to make sure every single person, every single client has the best possible experience. It's very difficult. Making everyone happy is a challenge. So trying to figure that out on a daily basis on how we can enhance our service, is definitely one of the lessons that rings true now.
Sure, that's good advice. Good for really any business to think about. So since this is the Guts and Glory show, we like to feature a gut story and a glory story. What in your career, what's a scenario that kind of took guts on your part, and what story can you tell me about that?
I think we've had a lot, but the most important is I think it took guts for us at the time in July of 2014 to leave, our six-figure jobs. My wife didn't leave; she was laid off in a downsizing, but we all left relatively comfortable six-figure positions to start a law firm at a time when every person, literally every person in our industry was like, "Don't do this now. Working with your wife, it's a terrible idea." And it was a huge risk because at the time, the workers' compensation law in Florida was not as lucrative on a per case basis as it is now. We've had some cases that have come down in the past 5 or 6 years that have really changed how much revenue you can generate on a case. But back then, it was very limited. And it was a very challenging time for all of us. When you're leaving behind a career that you're comfortable in or a position that you're comfortable in, and to just go out on your own. I mean, we started this law firm from my kitchen table. And, we've grown now to, I think we're up to 14 employees, and we keep bringing on more. It's just, sometimes I don't really get a chance to sit back and be like, wow, we started with nothing. And we pretty much started with nothing. I think when we formed our current group, three of us, we might've had 7 cases. I remember there were days I literally had nothing to do because we had such little work. So that was probably the gutsiest thing, at least from my perspective, professionally, that I've done.
Sure. How did you guys go about kind of getting work? You guys are obviously all very, very skilled attorneys, but when it comes to, marketing yourself or whatever, how did you kind of learn that process?
Yeah, so Luis has been very instrumental in refining our marketing, and now we're acquiring cases at a much better cost per acquisition than we were historically. I think we knew from the beginning the traditional model in Florida to grow the workers' comp firm, or at least it was maybe 7 years ago, was I'm going to link up with a big advertiser that does personal injury. Most of the personal injury firms back then did not handle any workers' comp cases, and I'm going to start a referral relationship with that law firm. So one of the things we did back when we started was basically, because we had so much time, we didn't have as many cases, is we just started a grassroots effort to link up with other attorneys to get workers' comp business. And back then, some of the referral partners that we dealt with weren't necessarily big, but some of those referral partners that are still with us now have grown significantly. So you just don't know who's going to emerge as the next big personal injury firm or big marketing firm. The other thing that we did is we did have the concept down of that we needed to do some kind of marketing. So like I said, back then we were allowed to do direct mail. That got abolished in about 2016, 2017. So we knew that once we lost the ability to send direct mail, which is relatively cheap, we had to do something. And I think the natural starting point was the internet. So that's really when we voyaged into digital marketing. And then over time, it's expanded, and we've done more social media marketing. We've dabbled in radio, and we're presently engaged in TV marketing. So go ahead.
You talked to that's kind of your gut story. What about a glory story? You told me one that was particularly kind of glorious.
Yeah, like that really probably for me is the one that will always stand out, because it was literally just a complicated issue on top of a complicated issue. So that one was probably my greatest glory, so to speak, winning that case. But I've one of the defenses that insurance companies love to assert in the state of Florida, it's called fraud. It's called the fraud defense. technically it's intentional misrepresentation. What happens is clients, specifically clients that have a significant injury history, will sometimes go to a medical provider. It might be 10 years later, 15 years later. And when they're asked about prior accidents or injuries, either for some reason they either forget or it doesn't get documented correctly, and they don't advise the physician, yeah, I had a back injury 12 years ago or 5 years ago. And insurance companies love asserting this fraud defense, alleging that the injured worker basically lied to the doctor, because before you get to a workers' comp judge, they can just cut all your benefits off. And it might take 6 or 7 months before you get to a workers' comp judge. A lot of clients don't have the stomach for that, and they'll just settle their case for about half its value. So I think I'm really proud to say is that I think I've represented 5 or 6 clients who've had that defense asserted against them, and we've won all of them.
Nice.
So we've had a lot of glory there. And it's just really a simple premise. Like, most people are not out there to commit insurance fraud. Most people, if they give an inaccurate medical history to a doctor, are doing it intentionally. A lot of people have trouble remembering what they ate for breakfast, let alone how many years ago did they hurt themselves or whether they had a prior MRI. So we've been very successful in that area.
Hey, David, thank you so much for your time today. I have one more question for you, but it's been a real treat having you on. We've been talking with David Benn, managing partner at workinjuryrights.com. Where can people find out more about you? That's kind of self-explanatory in the title, but how can people find out more about you?
Yeah, so our website is very informative. You can find us at workinjuryrights.com. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. So any of the social media.
Okay. My last question for you. What would you say are some action steps that people should start doing right now based on kind of what we've talked about today in terms of maybe people starting to establish their own firm?
So I think number one is you need to have a plan, and you need to really refine like what you want your law firm to represent. So that's the development of the core values, and also obviously refining the client journey. And also think about, what is the growth plan? If you achieve your revenue goals this year and you continue to grow next year, where are you going to add pieces? Because the goal really is to own a law business. Up until basically now, I was in a law firm. I didn't own a law business. I was practicing in my own law firm. Now I still have a small caseload, but now really I am involved in managing the business. And at least from my perspective, some people truly do love being a lawyer. Some people love it. They love taking the depositions, sitting in the depositions, writing the memos, writing the letters. Some people genuinely love that. I didn't. And for me, getting to come to work every day and do the things that I want to do, I mean, there's no price tag you can put on that.
Okay. Hey, thank you so much, David. It's been great. It's been great talking to you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So long, everybody.
You've been listening to the Guts and Glory Show with Luis Scott. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to share. For more information on this episode, please see the show notes at www.gutsandgloryshow.com. And join us next time as we talk to another leader in business that had the guts to overcome all odds for the glory of success.